Welcome, everyone. We'd like to thank you for participating in today's Hubbub Webinar, Hanging Up on the Telefund, the Silent Treatment to Advance the Conversation, led by our presenters, Amy Wilson and Julianne Troyer from Stanford University. Very quickly, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Kat Carter, one of Hubbub's digital giving specialists, and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. In this webinar, we'll be taking an in-depth look into the reasons why Stanford made the bold decision to end their telephone appeal. Amy and Julianne will outline the steps which led to their decision, how they executed the change, and how they're re-engaging their alumni and supporter communities through both digital and social giving strategies. And now to introduce our speakers. Amy Wilson is the director of the Stanford Fund. With a background in sales, Amy began her fundraising career as a major gifts officer at the University of Michigan before moving into annual giving at a variety of institutions, including Connecticut College and the University of Chicago. Amy currently leads the Stanford Fund team, responsible for raising $26 million annually to support undergraduate education, as well as Stanford's direct marketing team, which provides integrated marketing solutions for Stanford's 9 campus-wide annual giving programs. Julianne Troyer is Stanford's Director of Participation and Engagement. Julianne began her career in advertising and served as a marketing manager for the Global Women's Network before moving into higher education fundraising at Stanford. She works with annual giving programs across campus to identify opportunities for increased fundraising efficacy, conducting program analysis, and developing multi-channel marketing campaigns to achieve engagement, donor, and dollar goals. Amy and Julianne will present for 45 minutes, and we have allotted 15 minutes at the end for your questions. Questions can be sent via the Questions tab of your webinar dashboard. And we have quite a few attendees viewing this webinar today, so please feel free to post your questions at any time during the webinar so that we can queue them ready for the Q&A section. Any questions we aren't able to get to in the allotted time will be answered after the webinar by our speakers and sent out in the follow-up correspondence. And with that, I'll turn it over to our speakers, Amy and Julianne.
Hi, folks. This is Amy, and Julianne and I are delighted to be here today. As you heard from Kat, we work together on Stanford's direct marketing team. And last spring, Julianne and I undertook a comprehensive evaluation of our student calling program, which ultimately resulted in the decision to end the program. Before we get into our agenda for the day, I wanted to take a moment for some straight talk. The first thing is that annual giving is perhaps a bit like parenting in that we're all trying our best, and often the parenting technique that is best for one fund or baby is not the best for another fund or child. Some babies will stop crying as soon as the vacuum cleaner is turned on, and some will simply wail louder. To take this metaphor a bit further, we've noticed that the perception for some is that Stanford's decision has been a bit like the parent who shows up on the playground and announces loudly that they have just started to grow, from seed, organic kale in a hydroponic garden, and then pureed it with Himalayan sheep milk to produce the best baby food for little Leland Jr. To which a normal parent would say, well, that must be nice for you, what with your apparent copious amounts of free time and money, which is essentially what we've heard many times. Must be nice for Stanford, who apparently doesn't need any more dollars or donors. However, we hope this presentation demonstrates that this decision was made because over the long term, just like all of you, we are trying to grow donors and dollars in hopes of advancing the priorities of our institution, and we feel that this is the best way for us to do it. But we did not make this decision in hopes of convincing all of you to do the same. Instead, we hope today to elucidate a little more about what led to this decision in hopes it will be informative to you and useful as you think about your own funds. So with that preamble, let's look at our agenda for the call today. We're going to start by talking about how we use data analytics to listen to our constituents and understand how they felt about our calling program and how they wanted their relationship with us to change. We'll then talk about how we use these insights to make the case for change internally, which, as you may understand, was a task in and of itself, and how we communicated about this change to our constituents, as well as how we are ensuring our annual program is evolving to meet the needs of our prospects. Finally, we'll end with some notes and questions that we found helpful as we thought about this change, in hopes that it may also be helpful to you as you're considering changes to any parts of your program. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Julianne.
Hello. I'm now going to take you through the data analysis we undertook to assess the Telefund as a channel. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the high-level metrics and then progressively get more granular and specific with the data we found most compelling. And just as a note, we want to be as candid as possible in this presentation, and so we're sharing very specific numbers, and our ask to you is to not take screenshots or tweet or post on social media about any of the numbers that you're seeing here. So we thank you in advance for that. We started at the highest level, looking at the count of donors we were obtaining through the Telefund spanning from FY12, which corresponded with the end of the Stanford Challenge campaign, through to the close of fiscal year 15. You can see from this chart that we were seeing steady declines in our donor numbers, ending in FY15 with just over 4,000 undergraduate donors. While this chart is only showing undergraduate donors, who are critical for participation and the bulk of our donors, university-wide donors mirrored this same trend. The next aspect we looked at was dollars coming in from the Telefund channel. And as you can see, the decline in donors was mirrored by a decline in dollars, ending with just over 1.3 million in FY15. Once establishing our donor and dollar channel numbers, the next piece we wanted to investigate was how much we were spending per donor and per dollar on the Telefund channel, and how this compared with some of our other channels. Because of our declining donors and dollars, it is not surprising that our cost per donor have steadily risen since FY12, peaking at $74 per donor in fiscal year 15. This compared to a male cost per donor of $43. When we moved on to look at cost per dollar, the same upward trend is present, with the peak in FY15 landing at 44 cents, which compares to 9 cents in our male channel. After looking at those high-level donor and dollar metrics, we wanted to shift into looking at metrics that would help us understand the relationship our prospects had with the Telefund as a channel. And the primary metric we used to gauge prospect sentiment to the channel was our ratio of gifts to do not solicit requests. When we look at 2011, of the over 41,000 calls we made, we received just over 9,500 gifts with a corresponding 1,100 do not solicit requests. This translated into a ratio of 8 gifts for every 1 do not solicit request. When we fast forward to 2015, and of the over 55,000 calls we made, we received just over 8,000 gifts with a corresponding 2,700 do not solicit requests. This translated into a ratio of just 3 gifts for every 1 do not solicit request. This increase in DNS requests was substantial, and it served as an indicator that our prospects' relationship with the Telefund was changing. Phone calls have become a much more intrusive medium as landlines become obsolete, replaced by cell phones, and this increased DNS rate highlights that changing relationship. So you may be asking, why didn't we connect the line sooner? And there are really 3 widely understood and expected benefits of the Telefund as a channel. It is a strong medium in acquiring new donors and reactivating lapsed donors, in upgrading existing donors, and being a preferred channel due to its high-touch nature and the chance to speak directly with a current student or a real human. What we wanted to do next was take the time to analyze whether these widely accepted factors were in fact still true for Stanford prospects today. We started by looking at our donor mix, comparing Telefund gifts to non-Telefund gifts. In this chart, the top bar represents the volume of gifts we received from non-Telefund channels. There, you will see that of those gifts, 76% came from renewals, and 24% were from acquisition or reactivation. The second bar represents the volume of gifts we received from the Telefund channel. Of those gifts, 70% were renewals, and 30% came from acquired or reactivated donors. This incremental 6-point gain is small, and when you look at the pure volume, you can see that on the chart as well, you can see that the number of donors we were acquiring or reactivating from the Telefund was greatly dwarfed by the volume on non-Telefund channels. I'll leave that up just a few minutes so you can take a look. Next, we wanted to look at the upgrade behavior of our donors and how it was influenced by the channel that they were making their gift on. We wanted to make sure we were looking at the audience that was all donors who had been in our calling pool, so as to avoid potential skews from leadership level donors being excluded from particular channels or solicitations. So we controlled it by making sure that population was the same. The first group of individuals we looked at were those who had given on the phone channel for 2 years consecutively. The average group gift for this group was $139, and the average upgrade was $13 year over year. The second group of individuals we looked at were those who had given on the non-phone channel for 2 years consecutively. Their average gift was $510, and the average upgrade was $81 year over year. The third group of individuals we looked at were those who had given on the phone channel in year 1 and had given through the non-phone channel in year 2. This group's average gift was $218 with an average upgrade of $93. And the final group that we looked at were those who had given on a non-phone channel in year 1 and then the phone channel in year 2. For these individuals, the average gift was $225 and the average downgrade was $4. So I just spouted out a bunch of numbers that may seem a bit complicated. However, we were able to pull out 2 key insights from this. First, those who give more avoid the phone. And this is really highlighted by the higher average gift rates for non-phone only donors, that second group, and the highest upgrade amount for those who transition from the phone channel into the mail channel. Secondly, when these donors do give on the phone, they are giving less, and this is evidenced by the downgrade with the shift from a non-phone channel to the phone channel. And we speculate that this is likely due to the intrusion and time pressure of the phone as a channel and medium to reach our prospects. But you may wonder, what about those phone loyal donors? And in our analysis, we identified that 7% of our undergrad donor population were phone monogamous individuals, meaning that these were individuals who had only ever given to us through the phone channel. While limited in size, we still wanted to investigate this audience further. In our deeper analysis of them, we found that 100% of them had been called, and 58% of them had given in the first 3.5 months of the fiscal year. To us, this illuminated that some of this channel loyalty is likely because it was the first channel to reach them within our solicitation calendar. This finding, combined with the small size, made us feel comfortable with proceeding and utilizing high-touch strategies to ensure maximum retention of this audience.
So after looking over these numbers, Julianne and I were convinced that the phone program had some serious limitations and needed to be evaluated with all options on the table. Some have asked us if our declines were essentially a result of internal factors. Mainly, was our phone program simply not being managed well? Were there things we could have been optimizing and were failing to do? But our feeling really was that what was changing over the course of those 4 years was not the management of the phone program or the staffing or the skill of the callers, but rather that the external environment was changing. These changes included, as Julianne mentioned, the ways we all interact with the phone, now that most of us are likely to receive a call on our cell phone as opposed to a landline. When a cell phone rings, it can be in the middle of a work meeting, a kid's soccer game, or even a first date. And it's far more intrusive than even the previous cardinal sin, which we used to hear about, of interrupting family dinner time when the landline would ring. And this changing relationship is also reflected in legislation, with cell phones having more restrictions placed on them than landlines, certainly in America, but perhaps even more so in Europe and other countries. With here in America, there's extreme restrictions on auto dialing, something that was a concern to our legal counsel as to whether the software program we used to call these numbers was considered an auto dialer. In fact, this relationship has changed so much that in what is surely a first, academic fundraising has inspired a national comedy troupe to create a parody video focused on the horror of fundraising calls.
Make it stop, Michelle.
not 2004. We don't have a house phone.
For those of you who couldn't hear that end, she says it's not 2004, we don't have a house phone, which I think reflects how a lot of us experience phones now. So now that we understand the broader social and regulatory landscape that has changed, I want to talk a little bit about what the status of Stanford's Telefund program was at the moment that we were making this evaluation. At the time, we were what we call a master site full-year program working with Ruffalo Noel Levitt, formerly Ruffalo Cody, and this is the firm that, at least in the States, is sort of the largest firm for providing Telefund services to academic institutions. So we had a in-house, meaning sitting here at Stanford, phone calling manager who hired and managed about 100 student callers each year. We also had Ruffalo Cody manage the fulfillment of phone pledges using both mail and email. And our partner schools, so we have 9 school and unit annual funds across campus, and they all participated in our Telefund, and they paid about 15% of the total contract cost, with our central group taking up the rest. Additionally, the calling center took up space that could house approximately a team of 12 to 18. And I bring that up only because all of these factors were ones we had to consider when we were thinking about making any changes to the phone program. So the first option we saw was to do nothing. And this had some advantages, namely not moving any cheese in terms of disruption. It also meant that the issue of resource allocation and irritating our prospects was still present, which meant that we were potentially facing continued declining returns. Our second option was sort of a halfway option, where we would reduce our program by about half and call a more limited number of prospects. This had some savings associated with it, and it also would produce a bit of a reduction in staff resources, as well as reducing our reputational harm somewhat in that fewer prospects would be called. However, we also saw that it had many of the cons of continuing the program, meaning that we would continue to see a drop in undergraduate participation, and we wouldn't have new resources to allocate to doing something about that. Additionally, we felt we had the continued regulatory and reputational risks with this option. The third option was to eliminate the Telefund altogether. We would then reallocate a portion of the funds to some new positions, with the staffing focused on leveraging the promise of increased personalization and responsiveness inherent in digital marketing, while also developing strategies around building philanthropic affiliation from our modest donors, applying some of the thinking and strategy we've given to our major donors to our participation level donors. So while we made this recommendation, Julianne and I led with this recommendation as what we preferred, we also had to acknowledge that there were some serious risks to this approach. On the one hand, we were projecting losing 50% of the total Telefund donors in the year following ending the Telefund. While we anticipated that our dollar loss would be small, we did think that the donor loss was quite significant. We also had to acknowledge that some phone loyal donors may be disappointed and may never give any other way. And finally, we were eliminating a student calling corps and losing the chance to educate 100+ students a year on the value of philanthropic support of Stanford. However, on the other hand, we did feel that this was an opportunity to be donor-centric. And I don't know what happens in your shop, but at least in our shop, this term donor centricity is often tossed around to kind of get any new idea approved. I'm currently working on getting dogs allowed in the office and posing that that is in fact donor centric, but I'm not sure if that's going to work out for us. But I think that this was a chance for us actually to be in a way that our colleagues in major gifts might think about their prospects. The way I like to think about this is that if we had 1,000 major gift prospects and we decided to send 1,000 gift officers on the same night of the year to show up unexpectedly on the doorsteps of these prospects and ask them to make a major gift, we may expect that 10% of these prospects would say yes. They simply love Stanford or your institution enough to do it. They may give us less than what they would give if we had done this the right way, i.e. given them the time and space to think about their gift and not interrupted their dinner time. But at the same time, there would be some who would give. However, 90% would be very frustrated with us, and it would likely harm their ability for their interest in giving to us later. And so we would not consider that approach donor-centric. Yet this is what we've done with the Telefund. We've ignored the damage we do, at least at Stanford, to the 90% who never pick up the phone or who tell us, please don't ever call me again. And instead, we've been very focused on not losing those 10% who are making a gift each year. We also felt that this decision would allow us to invest in new channels. At least at Stanford, we were significantly behind the times when it came to investing in digital marketing. And so by moving resources out of the Telefund, we would be able to invest in a channel that we felt was growing. Finally, when we thought about our student calling core, we saw that unlike what calling had been many years ago, our students were no longer experiencing this as sort of an energizing or engaging position. We saw that with our extremely high turnover rates and the fact that we could retain almost no callers from year to year. And what the callers were reporting to us is that this was a very frustrating job wherein they were dialing many numbers, not many people were picking up, and oftentimes when people were picking up, they were quite frustrated with the callers, and the callers had to listen to that. So as a result of this recommendation, our leadership agreed with our decision, and we decided to make the move to solicit all of our prospects by drone going forward. And we look forward to updating you on those results. I'm kidding, obviously, but our leadership did agree to end the phone program and to reinvest those resources in other positions. And I think both Julianne and I were a little bit surprised when we kind of got this through. We thought we were going to be proposing this and then having it turned down. But in looking back, I think that there were some things that we did that helped us to have this recommendation accepted. And so just wanted to share some of the things we learned out of that. So the first thing I think that we tried to do is to think of our leadership as donors and apply leadership-centric thinking. So we started by thinking about what are some of the considerations for our leadership day in and day out. Oftentimes it's budgeting and staffing concerns, which is very pressing, though at the same time those concerns have to be balanced with the ultimate fundraising goals of donors and dollars. And so as we talked about this decision, we tried to be clear in framing both the impact this would have on staffing, but also on our fundraising results. And by looking at the opportunity cost of continuing with the Telefund as much as the risks of ending it. I think as humans, we tend towards loss aversion, so the idea of losing any donors that we currently have through our Telefund feels much scarier than the fact that we may be unknowingly alienating many more donors each year with a program like that. Finally, I think that we realized we needed to be cognizant of our leadership's desire or tolerance to be on the leading edge of something. Some of you may have leadership who are really excited by that and are looking for ways to lead in the field or be innovative, and so a decision like this might be posited as one that is something that is innovative and new, whereas for some, leadership is really a little bit more risk averse, and so a decision like this would need to only make sense or be positioned when it was sort of inevitable and the safest choice.
So I'll pop back in here and speak about once we had made the decision and garnered all the approvals necessary, we moved on to the task of trying to figure out how to best communicate this change to our prospects. At the outset of the creative process, we established two key goals of the communication. First, we wanted to generate goodwill from our prospects by demonstrating empathy for their experience with our solicitation approaches. And this included, addressing the irritation that happened through the calling program. And we wanted to be as candid and as humorous as possible. We really tried to conceptualize this as much as possible like a relationship you'd have in other areas of your lifestyle, where you do things, you're doing them from a good place, and you don't mean to be annoying, but then sometimes you come back and say, you know what, I realize our relationship is changing and we're going to change, we're going to get better together. So that's really the lens that we took in this. Our second goal was to ensure that constituents still understood the need for their support. Perhaps our potential greatest risk with this communication was to have prospects leave feeling with the sentiment that if Stanford doesn't need the calling program, they clearly don't need my gifts or dollars. So that was really weighing heavily as we did this planning. We communicated this change to all prospects who had been in our calling pool in FY15 and FY16. And within that population, we segmented on both school and unit affiliation. And as Amy mentioned, we have 9 different schools and units that we work with, as well as the presence of an open phone commitment. And this segment was just as much to acknowledge those who had shown propensity for the phone channel and therefore had an open phone commitment, but also to acknowledge the very different experience of those who were in the calling pool but didn't have an open phone commitment. And what that meant for us is that we called them a lot more. So their relationship with the channel would be very different. For the mail piece, in order to limit spend and ideally limit wastage, we mailed only to those phone prospects who had responded off a mail appeal in the past. Here is just a screen grab of the self-mailer that we sent through the mail to these prospects. On the inside, we had school-specific links and remits, and the interior message changed depending on whether there was a previous gift through the Telefund as a channel. When you read through this, I'm sure some of you have seen some of our solicitations, but some of you may have not. This is a very far departure from what we typically send out to our prospects. We tend to be much more constrained in the terms of what we're saying, but also how we're saying it. And this was a big leap for us to be a little bit more casual, more frank, more open, more transparent, and ultimately more human. One of our objectives here was to humanize the Office of Development and make it so that we can communicate to our prospects in not only solicitation means. And this was kind of our first foray into this, and I'll speak later about how we've expanded these programs. But we were really happy with this and actually had several people comment on this mail piece in and of itself. And Amy's going to talk about the results in a little bit. We also sent out a couple of emails as part of this campaign. This was the first one, and as you can see, it highly correlated to the mail piece. Interestingly, within this is the first time the Office of Development had ever sent an engagement email. There was no ask in here. It was purely meant to communicate the information about the change. And the only link was at the very bottom, which you can see, which says giveyourway.stanford.edu, which was the landing page we developed. And even on that landing page, there was a very small make a gift button, but in no way did the website call attention to that. And to our surprise and delight, when we sent this email out, we actually received 40 gifts within a couple of minutes of it deploying. So our constituents were open to this type of communication. We also sent a second email as part of this campaign, kind of a 2-email blitz, and this is much more similar to what we typically send here at Stanford. It tends to be plain text, pretty straightforward in terms of actions, in terms of what we're trying to get from them, in terms of what we want them to do, but also was meant to give more context around why we were making the decision. So just wanted to share that with you as well. And then finally, this was the landing page that we developed, which again was meant to provide a little bit more context as to why we were making this change, and everything drove here so that people, if they were interested, could explore further. I will also mention here that we were very excited to incorporate social media into this campaign because we felt that it was such a unique thing for the Office of Development to get to talk about. Usually we don't get to, break these types of news. So we were really excited about that, but unfortunately the timing of this corresponded with some poor university climate issues, so we, working with the university communications group, were asked to not put anything out onto social media about this for fear of some negative responses. And as a result, we did not do anything on social for this, but what I can say is that we did have alumni organically posting and sharing pictures of either the mail piece that they got or taking screenshots of the email and posting that on their social network. So we think that there was room there, but unfortunately we did not run an organized social media campaign with this.
Yep. So now I'm going to just move on to share a little bit of the results. And the reason we're kind of talking about all this and sharing the results is this is the best gauge we have for what did alumni think of this decision. So we think it's helpful to share that with you. And we didn't know what to expect because it was quite unlike anything we'd ever done, but we were pretty happy with the results. So for email, our open rates ranged from 36 to 40%, which is high for us given this population went university-wide and not just our most engaged undergraduates. Perhaps most surprisingly is that we actually received 110 people who emailed back to our email with positive responses. This is approximately 109 more positive responses than we've ever received to an email campaign. As Julianne mentioned, we also had 40 gifts generated, even though we weren't really asking in that email for gifts. In terms of web, we had more than 4,000 unique visits. We had a pretty high average time on page of 4 minutes plus, and we had 87 gifts from the page, including 13 people making recurring gifts. And again, this was exciting for us because it was the first time we drove people to a landing page and then had them convert from there. In terms of mail, the response rate was quite high with 380 gifts. Which we were also really happy with, and was, again, a departure for us from our typical letter piece. As Julianne mentioned, our social did not go forward, but the great thing was we had no negative responses, so our administration was happy about that. In terms of the alumni response, I thought I'd just share a little bit of some of the things that we received, because one of our biggest goals here was meant to humanize the office and kind of connect with alumni, and we really felt that these comments kind of showed that that goal was accomplished. And, you know, one of the things that we can say, though, is that while most of the responses were positive, they weren't all. This was one particularly noteworthy response, which I found, oops, I'll go back so you can see that, which I found rather amusing, and I do have to admit that this made me laugh out loud, and then I couldn't stop myself from responding to this donor, and in the end we had a very nice back and forth, and he did apologize for being a little cranky when he sent his email, which I think cranky is a rather generous term for himself, but it all worked out in the end. So what are our learnings from this campaign? The first is that when taking some creative risks, it can help to limit the cooks while also letting the necessary parties taste test. And what I mean here is just that, you know, Stanford, perhaps like your institution, has a consensus culture, but in the creative process, having too many people involved can mean that you end up with a very neutered product that is sort of bland, and that is often what was happening to us. So we took the approach this time of kind of keeping the creative team limited and developing an almost final product before we took that out to our partner schools and unit fund directors to get their approval. And as a result, they still had a chance to give input, but we were giving them such a fully baked product that they were really happy with it and ended up making minimal changes. We also learned, at least for our institution, that when you have a bigger stage, meaning some news that might actually have the potential to gain some traction on social media, that also means that the institution feels there's more risk just in people using this to respond or to talk about your institution in a negative way, and so that was an important learning for us. We also learned that a compelling landing page could be more persuasive than just simple email copy, that you can actually make more of a case on a landing page. So if you have a good story to tell, using a landing page can be an effective thing to drive people to from your email. I'm going to turn it back over to Julianne.
All right, so with the conclusion of our phone program, we turned our attention to improving existing initiatives and introducing new ones in order to continue to grow and develop our program. And what I'm going to do now is run you through a sampling of those efforts. So you might think that being centered in the heart of Silicon Valley, that Stanford would be very digitally savvy and kind of on, you know, leading that front. However, Stanford's development office has a lot of room to grow its digital footprint, and this was a key part of our strategy moving forward. Beyond growing our use of the medium, we also needed to develop our team's expertise in crafting messaging for digital channels. So what I'm going to do is take you through one of our successes as we look to expand digitally, but also take the time to highlight some of our challenges, because that's also part of the learning process. As a result of the new positions created, we were able to strategize, plan, and execute a comprehensive Giving Tuesday campaign that spanned all 9 annual funds. And by coordinating with all funds, we were able to develop a creative concept that worked for the entire Stanford community and developed a giving process that did not prioritize one fund over another. And this was a big deal for us because we had tried to work with all of the annual funds on Giving Tuesday before, but it always felt inherently skewed towards the undergraduate fund and population. And our work here really paid off, and you can see some of our numbers there. All of our outreach for this campaign was done on digital with a combination of email and social media. And we drove all traffic to a customized landing page that we had developed for the campaign. The other thing I'll add here is, again, based on what we saw from the Telefund announcement campaign, we interspersed engagement messages here, and actually one of the asks was to share photos of your Stanford family with the hashtag so that we could then pull them into a little widget that we had on our landing page. And we went into this thinking, well, we're going to have to get our young alumni teams to go out there and get students to do this because probably no one's going to respond to us because it's coming from the Office of Development. And we were really, really happy to see that we had over 40 to 50 responses organically from alumni who had received our emails across all of the different schools, showing some really, really great photos of who they see as their Stanford family. And we even integrated into a football game that was happening and had something on the Jumbotron, so it was really meant to coordinate with the community. And as you can see, as a result, we saw unprecedented gift counts. We actually broke the record for the most number of transactions processed within a day, coming in above even our calendar year-end or fiscal year-end crunch time. That said, we haven't always got it right the first time. This campaign followed a few months after Giving Tuesday and was centered around Valentine's Day. We were very proud of ourselves, both because of the creative and because of the social campaign that complemented it and ran concurrently. And we thought there was a lot of room for this concept to work on social media because, as many of you probably realize, we were trying to pull into that some e-cards meme that was pretty popular on social media. However, despite patting ourselves on the back, we had an 80% drop in gifts compared to last year for this same blitz. But why, you may ask, and we did too. And for starters, what we found is that per email, 1,000 fewer people opened, and per email, 75 fewer people clicked on our giving links. And what we did is determine that this lower open rate was because we used a generic sender this year, and we used volunteers last year, and we have repeatedly seen through our analysis that human voices do better for us in emails. They drastically change our open rates. Furthermore, our subject lines, while witty and funny, and we thought they were great, were vague and lacked a really direct call to action. In terms of our lower click-to-open rates, we saw that the content was not clear or direct about the ask. It was almost too engagement-y for our objectives for this piece. There also wasn't content above the fold related to the ask, and the images held a lot of the creative message, and we know from our analytics on our back end that many of our prospects are opening their email and not rendering images. So when they did that, they wouldn't see much of our creative message. And when they did display the picture, our giving links were below the fold. But this is exactly what we would expect as we expand into digital. We won't get it right the first time every time. However, when we do get it wrong, we get almost instantaneous feedback, which we can then use to make adjustments in our strategy. And we did for this campaign by adding an additional email that followed the best practices. I should state this now, that everything I stated to you are things that we know and try to watch out for, but the allure of great creative kind of put blinders on us. But we did send another email, and it worked, and it followed towards our best practices and really helped us pick up some of our missing donors. In addition to expanding our digital solicitation footprint, with our new resources, we are also able to launch new programs with both digital and mail components. The first of those is Stanford Loyal. Stanford had tried to develop a loyalty society 3 years ago, but the process slowed to a halt as it became increasingly difficult to gather consensus amongst the fund directors, again working with those 9 units. However, with these new positions, we are also able to plan, develop, and execute a brand new university loyalty society called Stanford Loyal in less than 8 months. This was in large part due to the fact that we now have staff time available to create and build consensus amongst the fund directors and also centralize the creative and data aspects of this project. As an initiative that is focused on our participation level donors, we see this as a key initiative in moving beyond the Telefund. This program has several digital elements, including a landing page, which offers digital calendars for download, which have been very popular. We are also expanding into new mediums. I've mentioned it throughout this presentation, but we are working to include paid social media to drive participation in many of our campaigns where the messaging makes sense. We are also planning to utilize retargeting and other paid placements, and this will become more and more important as we start to run more and more engagement elements within our campaigns so that we can make sure that we're appropriately addressing those individuals who have chosen to engage with us and therefore indicating their ripeness to engage with us further by making a gift. And we are also utilizing students for thank you calling to continue that student contact for phone loyal segments. And this is something we're actually already running. And this is just one comment that we've received back. And generally the feedback has been extremely positive, both from donors, but also from students. They very much enjoy making these calls and enjoy the chance to talk to these individuals. So you might be wondering, how are we doing in terms of reaching our donor goals this year? And at this time, approximately 3 months from the end of our fiscal year, we are on track to meet our projections on donor loss, which, as Amy mentioned, was 50% of our total Telefund donors. We are monitoring these renewal rates proactively each month and taking steps to ensure we are maximizing our return. Our current renewal rates are very even when we compare all undergraduate phone donors to those who we identified as phone monogamous. We are also monitoring the channels that these individuals are renewing on, and as you can see here, mail leads with email coming very closely behind.
So, of course, one of the most frequent questions we've heard after making this decision is, do you think all schools should end their phone programs? And of course, you know, as we stated at the beginning, we really don't have an opinion about what any other school should do. But we thought we could just, as we wrap up here, end with some questions that you might consider as you're evaluating your own program. The first is, how annoyed are my alumni? And that goes back to some of the data points Julianne started out with. So looking at opt-out rates as a ratio to gifts, looking at channel migration and seeing how people change their gifts as they change channels, and then also looking at any qualitative information you may have from surveys or from gift officers. Next, we want to think about what's my most important donor metric. For some, it's going to be pipeline. For others, it's participation. And so when we're thinking about pipeline, I think it's really important that we're looking at, are we building a base of donors who have the potential to become major, principal, or planned gift donors down the road? Whereas when we're looking at participation, we're thinking more about how broad a base of support can we have. When we're thinking of pipeline, then a channel that might irritate alumni would be less helpful. But when we're thinking about participation, a channel that maximizes the current number of donors may be more important. And finally, we want to think about how much room do I have to improve in other channels. As Julianne mentioned, at Stanford, we had a lot of room to improve digitally. If we had already maximized that channel, I'm not sure we would have been willing to give up another one. But since we could give up one channel in order to invest in something else, that made a lot of sense for us. But we did have to consider, do I have or can I acquire both the human and technological capital to make that happen? And I think that's an important consideration as well, especially as you're thinking about making the move into digital. It doesn't just mean getting the newest tools, although that's important as well, but it also means having people on your staff who can really work with those well in order to optimize them. So at this point, I think we're going to turn it over for questions.
Hi, thanks very much, you guys. We do have a few questions, so I'll get through to them. So this one came in pretty early on, and you will have gone through it, but just if you could give a quick rundown of what the non-phone solicitation channels are that you're now using.
I think we're talking there about mail and email primarily. When we were talking about sort of the channel migration, we were talking about mail and email. As Julianne mentioned, we've now added social to our mix as well.
Great. And then the next one is, was the projection 50% loss of Telefund monogamous donors, or was it a larger group?
It was a group of all. We projected losing 50% of all Telefund donors.
Okay, great. Did you give any thought to texting from the call center and using SMS as a channel?
You know what, that was something that we did explore. Unfortunately, we don't have the permissions required from our alumni to do that, so it becomes a tricky regulatory problem for us. But we are in ongoing conversations with, we actually work very closely with our alumni center, our alumni association in terms of data hygiene and making sure we're getting those permissions. So we are continuing those conversations, but it is not something we can currently do on a mass scale.
Right. Please keep your questions coming if you have them. Just type them into the questions area of your dashboard. We have a couple of about 10 minutes left, so we have plenty of time to answer questions. So we have another one here that says, can you share how many records were loaded into your calling software per semester, and the number of attempts the callers made on each record?
Yeah, I can speak big picture. We loaded over 100,000 records per year, and then in terms of attempts, it really varied. Obviously, between based on the time of year that someone was loaded, all of that. That our max attempt, I think, was at 15.
Okay. Ooh, lots more questions. Thank you very much. Okay. Did you ever consider a reduced Telefund program, just calling phone-only folks?
Yeah, that's a little bit what we were speaking to with our option 2. That was what we were looking at, was a reduced calling program. But as we mentioned, the issues we saw with that is that in order to you lose a lot of your economies of scale. So while you would reduce how many people you're calling, you're still investing a lot of time and money. And so we wouldn't have as much time and money to invest in new channels if we were to do that. And so that's why we ultimately made the decision to go all the way.
Great. And this might be a question that you've answered before, but knowing what you've seen from the results so far, if things don't go as planned, would you ever consider bringing back the Telefund?
Yeah, I think it's something, yeah, we'll consider anything. I think that we need to give it, I would say we need to give it a couple of years to see how things go, and because it's going to take that much time for us to build up our capabilities in these new areas. But, I think that all options always have to be on the table, and I think our biggest takeaway from this process is that the data and what your constituents are telling you should guide you, and so if they guide us back to starting a phone program again, then maybe we'll be doing a webinar about starting a new phone program in a few years.
You never know, things change all the time in annual giving.
Mm-hmm.
So some people might be thinking, well, I have all these students that I might want to try and engage them in some other way. So did you think of other ways that you could keep that call center engaged and those students engaged, such as prospective student service calls or enrollment and admissions calls?
Yeah, so in terms of student jobs, we wanted to make sure that there were still plenty of opportunities for students who are interested in working for the Office of Development to do so. So we had communications go out to all the callers, giving them links to other jobs, whether it was working on our reunion program or in different internships, so that there was still plenty of ways for students to engage with the Office of Development. In terms of using student volunteers or callers, we do use students for thank you calls, and that's part of our partnership program we have, where student groups receive funding in exchange for participating in doing things like that to steward our donors, like thank you calls.
Great. And then this one is more specific about your email campaigns, and if you could highlight maybe what some of the subject lines of your emails were, and if those help to encourage better open rates.
In reference to the cancellation notice Telefund campaign, or with regards to in general?
I think let's go with in general.
Okay. We found that we need to play a very careful balance here. I'm sure that many people know if you write "give now" with an exclamation mark or something that is too obviously solicitation focused, that also hurts our open rates. Right now, what we're seeing in terms of our best open rates is something that is a clear call to action, which one of our recent ones was we embed the first name into the subject line in terms of variable text, and then it could be something along the lines of "Why not now?" or "Find out what Stanford students are doing this summer." Anything. It doesn't have to be "Give now." It needs to be enough to get them to open the email, and then what we found within the actual content and body of the emails, we have some other best practices in terms of actually getting people to then follow through and click our giving links. But I'd say personalization and call to action are our best factors in maximizing our open rates.
Yeah. A question here about recurring gift rates via the Telefund, and if it was something that you were able to do very well through your Telefund campaign, and how you might be doing that now to attract recurring gifts.
We have, as I said about Stanford having some technological limitations, one of them is with our recurring giving platform and service provider, and so we actually weren't able to ask for recurring gifts through our Telefund, so that was a non-starter. We are doing it more through email now. We just have challenges in that once people sign up for recurring gifts, we can't actually notify them when their card's going to expire or when it has stopped working. So we're kind of in a little bit of a holding pattern where we're trying to improve that before we really sort of focus exclusively on recurring gifts, because we don't want to affect the donor experience too much.
Great. And just a couple more. So this one is, you mentioned you're reallocating your Telefund budget to other resources, including hiring 3 new positions. What was the monetary amount that was reallocated to eliminating your Telefund?
That's probably not information I would share in this venue, but what I can say is that just because we were working with a vendor on a contract, so I just want to be respectful of that. What I can say is that we did not reallocate. We reallocated 2/3 of our Telefund spend on our new positions and program budget for those new positions, but we did not reallocate the full amount. We sort of gave 1/3 back to the institution.
Great. And then we'll just do one final one here, and it's how big is your thank you calling campaign to what your telethon was, and how many people do you contact through that?
Sure, good question. So this year was our first year doing it, so we just ran 3 different calling nights, and we reached about 5,000 of our donors, so much smaller than our full program was, but it was a really successful with students. We had more students sign up than we had shifts for, so we're going to expand those shifts quite a bit next year, and we're hoping to be able to call through up to like 15,000 or 20,000 prospects in total. And we had folks leave a message if they didn't reach someone.
Okay, great. Do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up the webinar?
No, this has been great, and really appreciated everyone's time and attention, and look forward to being a resource for any questions if you have them going forward. Thanks so much, Kat.
Yep. Just a couple of things from me before we end. Firstly, a big thank you to Amy and Julianne for their time and their dedication to putting this webinar together. I met Amy and Julianne in Florida at the CASE Senior Leaders and Annual Giving Conference, heard their presentation, and was kind of right there after they were done to see if they could come and present their presentation with us today, and it's been a pleasure and a joy and very informative, so thank you very much. I just wanted to point out a couple of other resources that are available to you. We have a sharing center on hubbub.net where you can find lots of different resources from institutions around the world that have been using digital fundraising best practice. So anything from crowdfunding how-tos to giving day appeals, they're all available there. We also have Crowdfund List, which is a digital giving listserv, which you can sign up to, and it's available to anybody. And you can ask questions and learn from your colleagues in the sector about everything digital giving, not just crowdfunding. There will be a quick survey that will launch after this webinar is finished. It's only 5 questions, so if you have time to complete that, it would be very helpful to our next webinars and to evaluating how we've done. And lastly, I want to thank every single one of you who attended today and for being a part of our community and our growing community, as well as providing excellent technology around crowdfunding, giving campaigns, and ambassadors. We really enjoy working with excellent speakers to share their knowledge and experience with higher education and the charity community. And we hope that you found today's webinar useful when considering your own strategies for success. So with that, thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.